as I can. If you have questions, send them. I have no problem pausing in the middle and addressing those. We can certainly save them for the end too. So let's get into it. Scaling your business with the Zoom method, a better plan. All right. There we go. All right, well, so you know what I look like, you know who I am. So my forte is in the food and beverage CPG space, but I am part of the manufacturing distribution team at Baker Tilly. So I'll quickly take you through an introduction, a little bit about Baker Tilly, kind of where I come from, what I do, and then I want to set the stage with some, I'll call it current events, kind of what was happening pre-COVID to the industry from a 40,000-foot standpoint and how that was impacting all the various tiers of the industry, as well as what's going on during COVID. I think it's important we spend a little time there because it really does tie into this whole strategic planning piece. Like, what do you do next and how does this affect your business? What are you going to do differently to survive? And everybody knows things are likely to look different. So does your plan adapt for those kind of changes? And we believe potentially it doesn't without some adjustments. And then I'll take you through some use cases and really get into what this Zoom approach, this alternative approach is, and then we'll finish up with some Q&A. So about Baker Tilly, who are we and what do we know about your business? Well, we are accounting and advisors. We consult all various industries all over the globe, everything from agribusiness to construction, food and beverage, manufacturing to distribution, government stuff, energy, utilities, etc. And that helps us get some real perspective as we see different things in all these different industries. The other thing is we do it from every tier. So whether it's the manufacturer or producer, down to the distributor, broker, dealer level, down to the merchant or retailer, all the way into the consumer. So we're at all three of those tiers. So again, that gives us some perspective on what the needs are and how to address them. We do have a team of specialists. They do all sorts of things, and I would probably be considered one of those specialists. So where are we? Well, we're kind of everywhere, about 160 some odd countries or 146 territories, if you will. Our headquarters is in Chicago, and I work out of the Minneapolis office. No, it's not snowing here anymore, but it is usually cold. I'm not from Minneapolis, but we'll get into that later. So we've got a big footprint, and this also, our clients see a lot of value in us, reading the tea leaves, from other parts of the world of what's affecting the business and the consumer, what people are doing, not only in those countries and those cities, but also the various industries. And then from our ability to stay connected, we get involved, right? It's one thing just to advise or consult or do some financial tax audit compliance. It's more than that. If we don't really roll our sleeves up, join organizations such as yours, or associations and guilds and whatnot, we'll have a hard time staying connected. So we like to really understand what's impacting your business, and that's why we get deeply involved. And this is a very truncated list. Frankly, I think I missed a ton of stuff in Pennsylvania, but I could probably just fill up one slide if it was just Pennsylvania, but this is a sort of a cut of the cloth from across the country. So there you go. Who am I? Well, I grew up in St. Louis, so yes, I'm a Cardinal fan. Yes, I'm a Blues fan, and I don't like to talk about football for obvious reasons. I spent most of my career working for Anheuser-Busch. I'm a graduate of University of Missouri, so Mizzou, big Tiger fan in the SEC. Once I graduated from there, Anheuser-Busch hired me, shipped me right off to New York, so I've spent some time on that Northeast coast. Frankly, in my 25 years with Anheuser-Busch, I had 18 different positions, and I had this wonderful star pattern that I moved all over the country. I've been up and around your area many a times. I lived in Columbus, Ohio, Morristown, New Jersey, Long Island, Forest Hills, Queens, Upper West Side of Manhattan, Minneapolis twice, St. Louis 3 times, Milwaukee. Anyway, list goes on. We don't need to go about that, right? So it's like Johnny Cash. I've been everywhere. So point being is I've had a lot of experiences at multiple levels of Anheuser-Busch. No, I've never brewed beer, and I've never cleaned up after the Clydesdales, but I've done everything in between. So my expertise is on that sales, marketing, strategy, compensation, how to keep your distributors focused, how to address retailer needs, all of those things. And I was lucky enough to leave Anheuser-Busch after 25 years and find a great opportunity with Baker Tilly, where I was able to perpetuate a lot of what I was doing at Anheuser-Busch, but just in a different way. Okay, enough about me. Let's get into sort of the meat of what we're going to talk about. This is the agenda. I've kind of already taken you through an introduction. I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with Baker Tilly already, and I'm going to level set some things with regards to what was going on pre-COVID and what was going on during COVID and how that's impacted the industry. I think it's important we spend some time in this section because it has an unbelievable link to your strategic plan and how to survive coming out of this. And I hate to call it just a recovery phase because what we're proposing in this Zoom approach, this alternative approach, is really more than just a quick little tweak just to kind of get by. This is really a new way to kind of think about how your business operates to be able to have a different planning cycle. And then we'll get into some the reasons why Zoom makes sense and some benefits and all that. So let's get into the whole disruption stuff. And every one of these bullets probably will ring a bell with somebody. There's no doubt this is impacting you to some degree. So I've split this slide up into sort of three slivers, though they're kind of interrelated. So from an industry perspective, 40,000 feet, pre-COVID, we were seeing innovation absolutely explode, right? Not only retailers were struggling handling it, they definitely want to address it because they want to stock the shelves with what makes sense. And the demands to the suppliers has been significant, right? Don't run me out of stock, give me more of what I need. So it's been very difficult to keep up. And so there's been some struggle there, but also some great opportunity if you've got your business set up right. And then from service levels increasing, retailers have been making very big demands, and frankly, manufacturers are listening. They realize they can't just operate in a small space and go with just the big guys. They realize that business is all over, and so they're starting to address everybody's needs. Minimum wage pressures have been across the system for pretty much everybody, and I don't mean that in a bad way. What I mean by that is minimum wage going up is likely a good thing, but what I'm saying is it's very hard to retain people because you're seeing a high frequency. People are leaving for a couple extra dollars to go, work at a fast food chain or somewhere else because minimum wage there might be pretty good versus other places. So it's different, market by market. So there's not quite consistency across the board in where that is. But so there's minimum wage pressures. Consolidation is happening at an unbelievable pace in all three tiers. When I say all three tiers, I mean manufacturer, the producer, a distributor, dealer, broker, and then of course merchant retailer, right? So everybody's looking to figure out how to scale up, and at times they feel like buying somebody else is the way to go, whether they can pick up some different type of offerings, get some learnings out of it, or frankly just expand their footprint. It's happening. We know that at Baker Tilly because we do a lot of M&A and we get calls constantly. We see it on both sides of the fence, people selling, people buying. And then tariffs were a big deal prior to COVID, right? That was the talk of everything, whether it was China, whether it was Mexico, whether it was Canada. People were worried about the futures. If you're buying steel, aluminum, or something else, how are you going to get your supply across the border? What's this going to be? Everybody was very worried about that. And then, of course, the political drama, which you can say is still happening. It's better than a soap opera watching on TV. It's amazing. But there's a lot of that. And there's a lot of uncertainty with that, too. So that's been a big talk and a concern with most businesses because they don't know where it's headed. Data breaches and cybersecurity we're seeing at an alarming peak. We're seeing people invest all sorts of money in software and platforms and technology, and they're not spending the extra on the insurance policy, which I would call cybersecurity, to make sure their data is safe. And some people are learning the hard way. So cybersecurity is a big deal. Sustainability is obviously something everybody's trying to work towards, and people are still trying to figure out how to do it in a cost-effective manner, but yet still do it. And then competition. Competition has been unbelievably fierce at that top level, and it seems like it's coming from all angles. And so people are really trying to figure out how to compete in a different way. From the middle tier, the distributors, dealers, brokers, people who you get your supply from, and at times you do get it straight from the manufacturer, other times you get it from a distributor, but they have been expanding beyond the core before COVID because they felt like they needed to, depending on what they were selling. Their business was flat or nominally up. It wasn't growing like it used to decades ago because there's so many new players in the market. So they're trying to figure out what else do I need to sell to make it work? And that loyalty to the largest supplier as they're taking on these new products gets definitely tested, right? Because they're picking up other things. They're taking their eye off the ball to some degree, but not necessarily because it's a demand problem, only it's because other things are hot. And suppliers are, they're barking. They want to sit down and have more conversations about why aren't you focusing on me? So that's on the rise. SKU rationalization is at an all-time high as distributors have taken everything in. They've realized, one, they don't have a system to handle it, and two, it's hard to keep their people focused on everything. So they're really struggling with what makes the most sense, what really sells. Variable compensation has definitely been a key buzzword, and it's going beyond just salary paid people. When I say variable compensation, I mean a portion of pay is in the achievement of key KPIs or controllable metrics that various employees are targeted for, volume, it could be distribution, frankly, it could even be turnover, freshness, whatever, right? There's all sorts of things that you could put in variable pay, but it's allowing people to overachieve, make more than what their current compensation is, as long as they hit their numbers. Anyway, so variable compensation has been a big deal. Territory expansions continue, whether it's just local or global. People are grabbing more space, even on the distributor side. They're going statewide, they're going multiple states, they're going national, whatever it might be. They realize that why can't they in this digital age expand? They can have multiple warehouses, they can have multiple operations. Succession planning. It's definitely becoming a concern of the leadership group that not every business is going to the family, so to speak, but the kids or whoever the next leaders are in line, they haven't spent as much time in the business, or frankly, they haven't cut their teeth the same way. So the ownership or the family realizes that they don't know as much, and they're really concerned about handing the keys over to the car to let them drive. So they're realizing that there's some gaps here in learning, and that's becoming a real concern for a lot of owners. Employee retention. People aren't sticking around with jobs as often as they were, so they're moving around, and that gets very costly from an HR standpoint. That constant revolving door training people is problematic. And then there's a lot of boutique operations opening up that are challenging. They may come in with one or two offerings, but they're doing it in a unique way on that distributor level. And then from a retailer merchant perspective, even the consumer, your customer, what they're buying, all of this, chains are expanding. Independents are getting chain-like. The word chain is almost out the door as manufacturers are beginning to treat everybody the same. They feel like, again, business is everywhere, and I can't overlook anybody. So the attention to detail has been great, and retailers, the power is swinging back to them, which is awesome. Not that it ever left them, but retailers, merchants just want to get it right with regards to what's on the shelf from a holding power, margin dollars, turnover, all that stuff. Anyway, also we're finding that retailers just don't have the time to converse with people door-to-door sales, so to speak. One, we've done surveys and we see up to 70 people in a week come in and ask for the owner, the decision maker, the manager, somebody in charge, and trying to sell something. And it's unbelievably distracting for those general managers or the decision makers at each one of these establishments to cut that amount of time on a weekly basis to entertain some new idea, whether it's a current provider or a new one. They've had it. So they're pivoting to shopping online and finding another way to educate themselves and get the products and spend less time face-to-face. There's tons of disruptors in the market, right? So whether it's Amazon Prime, Provi, Barley Sober, which is a Philly-based new company, Uber, autonomous vehicles, even some of the home delivery stuff like Instacart. Those are amazing disruptors that are really leading the way into a new realm of what the consumer's really looking for. And they're changing the whole landscape of how we run our business, which obviously has a lot of impact from a strategic standpoint long term. That's why we're going to talk about what we're talking about today. And then product innovations. There's organic, specialty food, prepared meals, Himalayan sea salt. So everybody's looking for something unique and healthy and out there. And so it gets very difficult to manage these things. CBD, everybody's trying to figure out where that's going. Consumer wants health conscious stuff. Consumer loyalty is being tested without a doubt as they're bouncing around trying all sorts of new things. And then to make it more complex on your business, you're not just marketing to one person, right? There's all sorts of generational type things here, and everybody's got different shopping styles and pattern needs and wants. So it's like, how can you be everything to everybody and address all of this? It's unbelievably complex. Okay, moving into the COVID situation. Some of these things changed, some of them didn't. I'm just going to cover some of the ones that I think are probably the most important. From an industry standpoint, there's no doubt there's been business shutdowns, and we're seeing a bit of a mix shift, right? Anything that was on premise was shut down. Some things are starting to open, but a lot of it went to the off premise. People are shopping there. I mean, you probably saw it for St. Patrick's Day, or you really saw it for Cinco de Mayo as people celebrated at home instead of the local neighborhood bar. So they're having home parties and whatnot. But it definitely impacted what was going on. There's an opportunity here to capture new business too while this is going on. So how nimble are you would be my question. Don't have to answer that now. Essential business operations are the ones that have been open. A lot of the others closed. Obviously, face mask is a word that everybody understands. There's all sorts of cleaning and other protocols along with operating your store if it's open, and that's really changing some of the dynamics on how we work. Social distancing is obviously a word also everybody understands, and how does that work with regards to the new way of doing business, the new normal or the next normal. And then you got e-commerce. That's a no-brainer. Everybody's diving into it pretty hard. Manufacturers, though, have been cutting SKUs or frankly focusing on their highest producing SKUs. I'll call it A and B, but they're not really manufacturing C, D, and E, so to speak. So they're trying to make sure that they can keep the supply going. I think a Charmin or all the other paper products, and just do the obvious and not all the variants. From that middle tier distributor, dealer, broker level, we're finding they're focusing on just the stuff that really sells and moves, the core offerings. So they're cutting SKUs back, trying to be a little smarter about how they move through product. Yes, they furloughed a number of employees in some areas, and frankly, there have some instances they're having a hard time getting them back. But they furloughed some folks, so there's some interesting dynamics there. Yes, there's been some government funding to keep people alive, so to speak, meaning keep their businesses running. Some of these folks, frankly, were struggling before COVID hit, so we'll see what happens afterwards if they were able to figure it out and change their stripes to spots, so to speak. So loyalty to the largest supplier, frankly, started swinging back as we saw a lot of products start to take off that were soft over the years. Close to home for me, is beer. We're seeing Dixie Beer, Pearl Beer, Sam Adams, Sierra Nevada, a lot of these older time beverages and crafts actually come back to play. Consumers feel safe buying something that's been around for a while, so they're buying those name brands. I know you've all seen it. And then so from the retailer consumer evolution, what's happening from a disruption standpoint as we're kind of in the COVID and hopefully coming out of it, is the on-premise stuff is definitely closed. Some of it's opening up, but it's really impacting these major metros with, baseball and state fair closings and street festivals and fairs and whatnot. So, and those furloughs have been where most of those have taken place, and those folks are either unemployed, they've lost their job, and it's impacting discretionary income. So we're seeing also a slide in some segments where people want to buy things that are in bulk, cheaper, multi-packs, if you will. They're shopping the club stores, trying to figure out what do I need in bulk. I don't want to go out as many times. I want to shop once a week or once a month instead of twice. And then, of course, government loans, there's a lot of those out there, and people are trying to figure out how that works. Grocery, supermarket, club stores, we're seeing all sorts of long lines for the essentials, and you know what those essentials are. And retailers just don't have time either for that relationship-based selling, which used to happen. That's still the case now, and everybody's pivoting over to shopping online. Okay, so that was a mouthful. But that's important to understand all of these things. There's no doubt in my mind that you're all saying, yeah, okay, we get it, Jack. We've seen all this, read about it every day, and it is impacting our business. And then the question is what are you going to do about it, right? And that's why I want to talk about this Zoom approach. Now, everybody's got some sort of a roadmap. This one may look goofier than most. I use circles instead of pillars, but because I feel like these all touch each other. But a typical retailer roadmap is looking at, what does the customer want? What do I need to put on my shelf, right? But I also got to look at what's going on at the macro level and the micro level to be able to make sure I get this right. So it's pandemic demands as things kind of slide around, and what's hot now versus what's hot later. It's government regulations, but it's all about what's trending from a consumer standpoint. It starts there, right? Then you move into what technology, what do I need to operate my business, so to speak, or run my business effectively? Business intelligence, it's data, right? It's all about the data. I'm sure you're looking at SPINS data, syndicated data, and you're trying to figure out, okay, what's moving, what's not? Is it my geography or somebody else's? Is it coming here? Those things are important, right? And then you're looking at all sorts of things, experimenting, whether it's Walmart, who's, everybody's doing something like this, but Walmart's testing the no cashiers, right? And self-checkout. And you got Kroger using, they grab a gun and you're scanning it as you're going through the store yourself. So, it's quicker. They're thinking about that whole customer experience. How do I get people to come? How do I move them through quicker and safer? What do I need to do? Can technology play in that for me? And the answer is, of course it can. And then from an operational standpoint, how can you be efficient and effective? And really, from an infrastructure standpoint, how do you scale quick? How do you get this right? How do you get the right stuff in your store, but how do you explore other things, right? It's that just-in-time inventory. It's hiring, maybe your people can't handle it, so it's cheaper maybe to go outside for outside merchandisers to stock the shelf or rotate. It's the whole e-commerce. How does that help you do the operation side of it? It's have customers maybe pick up from the parking lot. They call in their order. It's personal shoppers. There's some companies out there like Shipt that do it. It's basically, you can either do it online or you call in. It's like an Uber driver, right? They just go get your groceries and bring them to you. And then home delivery too. Everybody's experimenting with forms of that. So that's like, how do I think about doing this differently? And then on the supply and demand side of it, it's all the whole product categories. It's like SKU rationalization. What am I carrying? What's the right thing to put on the shelf? What has the holding power that's going to turn for me, but yet I make a good GP per SKU? And then, of course, it's the marketing plan and promotion, and that obviously is going to change because you can't, I don't know how people feel about sampling things along the way, but there's all sorts of loyalty programs and, temporary price reductions and in-store programming and brand awareness, social media, et cetera. So that's kind of your pillars here, and they all interact, and that's why I've got circles instead of pillars, because each one of these things kind of blends into the other. But this is a typical roadmap for anybody to figure out their business. Okay, now let's get into the meat of what this Zoom thing is and what's the traditional plan. Okay, so traditional plans, you've heard of them before. It's, a 5-year, a 3-year. It's probably got an annual business plan component, and the 5-year has the typical vision, mission, values. It's got some aspirations to it, but these are normal things, and the 5-year plan has been, I'll call it traditional. And that's what most people do. They do some sort of a SWOT analysis to really get a feel for what their company's capable of doing from a strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. And they go through the whole exercise. They bring in a leadership team. They maybe even bring in some other people cross-departmental, and they really try to figure out, like, where are we headed here? Which direction are we sailing? And then they combine some strategies and tactics to be able to execute whatever they feel like they want to get behind, right? And then they lay in some KPIs, some measurements, and then they figure out their budgets to be able to go execute. That's the typical plan that we've all been used to. And I'm going to say that that's a good way to look at it, but you've got to add some new components, and we're going to call it Zoom. And so I'm not saying this is a bad process. Some people have truncated it to a 3-year plan to make it a lot, the horizon a little bit closer, so we're going to do it at a much more faster pace. And of course, all these things have a component of an annual plan that you're constantly reviewing and making tweaks. And anybody that doesn't have a 5-year or 3-year and just as an annual plan, well, I'd say they're guessing. They're just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. So do we really need to change? Well, traditional approaches don't always account for everything. And I would say routine review, and you would say, well, we do a routine. We got the annual business plan. I'm talking about a routine review in a very different way. I'm talking about it much more frequently than an annual plan. And I'm also talking about stretching it to be much further beyond your own industry and much further beyond 5 years. It's doing both. So we're looking at the other ends of the spectrum here and having some really high frequency on that. And then it's also bringing in some national and global insights across all sorts of industries. Most, when they go through the 5-year plan, they just think about how they're doing versus others in their industry. They might look a little over the fence, but they don't really look over the fence to see well beyond their territory and into other industries. And other industries, believe it or not, in some cases are much more progressive than you are. And that's great news because there's some good intelligence there that you can get and bring into your organization. And so I challenge, and we're going to get into what that is. Rapid pace of change, it's definitely happening. It's super hard to predict. And so if you don't have some other metrics and ways to look over the fence and into other territories, then you're going to get caught up by just trying to figure out what's happening in your own neighborhood, and that frankly may change too quick. It's going to be costly to make those kind of adjustments. And then the pressure to perform, right? At the end of the day, we're all here. I mean, you got to make business, right? And you got to make money. You got to have profit. There's got to be some kind of return on investment. And the pressure to perform in this Zoom strategy is a little bit different than it is in a 5-year plan, because it challenges some of the traditional ways of thinking, and it puts some real metrics on the daily, weekly, monthly, as well as longer term, obedience to observing further out. Okay. So from a traditional planning approach, obviously the goal is to respond quickly to events as they happen. Got to be flexible. Speed is required for success, the flexibility and speed. You got to be able to do both, and you can't be everything to everybody, right? It's super hard to have a whole bunch of initiatives and make it work. Adding programs and resources can create something additional to the company. I call it incrementality, but it also risks taking the focus away of what you're really, really good at, what your core is. I almost want to call it your why, but it's really what you're good at. So it's a costly drain to resources to, focus on all sorts of things. It's better to be much more diligent in your planning and just be more focused on something specific. So if you are focused and you're spreading resources too thin, it creates a lot of short-term fire drills, and it's unbelievably distracting to your people. So you got to have some real rhyme and reason to what you're doing. I would call it the culture's got to be blended in to make it work. I want to give you 3 use cases that maybe better describe what I'm talking about. And so a use case, maybe you've heard of it, this is an old one, but it's a good one to understand, is Swiss watch company, right? And that could be plural, they made more than one watch. But Swiss watches, they had an unbelievably high market share, might have had a 99% market share. I mean, if it wasn't a Swiss watch, you probably didn't have a watch. And they were really good at what they did. And in their traditional 5-year plan, all the metrics that they were getting back said their customers loved their watches. There was nothing wrong with their watches. High rating across the board on everything. But what they weren't doing is looking into other industries, realizing that there was a digital age coming. They weren't looking at computers. They weren't looking at calculators. They weren't looking at all these other things that went digital. What do you know? The watch goes digital. And what happens to them? They lost unbelievable market share almost overnight because they really weren't. Their 5-year plan wasn't looking far enough out, and frankly, it wasn't looking wide enough out. So they didn't challenge their people hard enough to make sure they got it right. And so that's a great example of why the traditional plan can fail. Let me tell you about a few other ones. Apple computers. We all know IBM was the first, out there. I mean, they basically revolutionized the computer, and maybe somebody came up with one before them, but they were the most dominant making computers. But Apple came in and thought about computers a little bit differently. They had a unique operating system. They were agnostic to who used it, and they were focusing on where IBM wasn't, which was home use. IBM was focused on business. They thought that home use market was so small, they didn't worry about chasing it. Well, Apple did, and they got it right. They saw that white space. They figured out how to put their business, all the pieces in line, and they went to attack it, and where they are today. Now they're developing all sorts of variants. My kids have all sorts of stuff I wish they didn't have, but they got all the stuff, and it's great. So Amazon, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Amazon, but we obviously know that they have transformed the shopping experience. And even with the Amazon Prime, taking it from brick and mortar to online has created all of us to, step back and take a look on how that's working. And I don't know where it's going to go from here, but it's amazing. Same day deliveries and how they're doing what they're doing. They got big quick, and they saw an opportunity, and they aligned their business to figure it out. So these are 3 great examples on, I would say, how the traditional could fail you, or frankly, how a Zoom approach may very much help you to be able to stay ahead and read the tea leaves. So enough with the use cases. Zoom out, zoom in. What is this, and how does it work, right? So zoom out from a 40,000 foot level is basically looking 10 to 20 years out. And you might say, I have a hard time looking 5 years out. I get it. There's more to it than just looking 10 to 20 years out. It's really, there's some other components here that would make this work. but you have to look further out to be able to figure out where you're going to go. You got to be able to chart your course. I'd almost equate this to sailing across the ocean, right? You can't keep doing nominal tweaks to the wheel. You got to know where you're headed. So understanding what that industry looks like long term, and what does a company need to look like to be able to operate in that kind of environment? What do you need to succeed? So that's basically the zoom out, and we'll get a little more detailed here in a minute. The zoom in is looking closer, much closer. It's getting that 6 months out and really constantly working the plan, but it's also about limiting the amount of focus points that you have. Only focus on a few initiatives. You don't need a whole bunch of them. You just need to have some clarity for your people and keen focus on what you believe is going to take you to the future, right? So that also helps you put the resources in the right places to ensure what you're doing is successful. It also helps you put some, I would say, business intelligence or some tools and technology around that piece to make sure it's going to be successful. But it's identifying those controllable metrics and tracking and measuring them along to make sure you have success. And then I like to use the term radical candor. It's about care personally and challenge directly. This is more of a cultural thing, and we all have been to lunch with somebody who got, a piece of spinach in their teeth, and it's kind of like, God, do I say something right in front of everybody? Or it's like, that's what it's like, you got to say something. You can't let them continue to talk with that piece of spinach in their teeth, right? We've all been in that awkward position at some point, but that's what I'm talking about. If you have a culture that has this radical candor, you can stop working on things that aren't working. You can challenge, company initiatives that frankly maybe don't make sense anymore. It removes the whole personal ties to, well, this is my assignment and I might be high up in the company or I've got the right last name, so we're gonna make this work. It's like, it's not about that. It's really about what's good for the company and people and processes and data need to challenge what makes sense. Okay, enough about that from the 40,000 foot standpoint. Let's get a little more. Give you another example. I know you guys hate the Patriots, but I didn't use the Eagles. I'm using Bill Belichick only because he's been an absolute winner in his game, and it's just amazing how he approaches every game, right? So historically, he's got this unbelievable game plan. He's making adjustments along the way. He's got relentless execution. You hear it on every time they interview a player, everybody says, know your job. Failure's not an option, it's an attitude. It's just amazing how he has built this culture of being successful and just very detail-oriented in the way he goes about things. So I'm going to give you two examples, taking a game time instance of zoom out and then zoom in. So from a zoom out perspective, playing the game, let's just pretend the game is longer than 4 quarters or each quarter is, 3 or 4 years long, right? So what he's doing is he'll have a running game. He'll hand the ball off the running back, and that guy will just keep pounding for a couple yards at a time. And what appears that it's not working, the fact is his strategy by running the ball up the middle is he's just going to pound that, that defensive line of the other teams so hard that they're going to start making mistakes. They're going to get tired or they're going to get replaced by the second string. And so later in the game, third or fourth quarter, when they keep pounding the ball down, they're going to have much more success that running game or pass threat. So that's sort of a zoom out perspective because he's thinking longer term benefit for these short term gains. Okay, zoom in example for the same scenario is we constantly see different plays being called in, whether Tom Brady's listening to his headset from the sidelines or the booth, he's getting adjustments to plays because they're seeing what's going on. They're seeing, the competitive formations in the defense and how they might be addressing their plays. So they'll make, quick adjustments to make big gains. That's sort of a zoom in approach. And that's probably the best way for me to describe, or at least give you a football example of the difference between the two. Okay. How does this differ from a 5-year strategic plan? Well, Zoom sets, a solid yet fluid course for the destiny of the company. It can change. We're not bound by what it is, but we are bound by success and where we're headed, right? It allows for the necessary tracking and measuring and learning along the way so we can make these relevant tweaks to our business. And then it's also combined, and these are really two key components. It combines the data side of it, I'll call it business intelligence, and it combines some outside perspective. And the outside perspective is unbelievably important to challenge your leadership team to think differently. For instance, I'm agnostic to who you use. Love to use Baker Tilly, but my point is if you bring in people to challenge your people, they're not tied to relationships. They're not tied to personalities. They don't have the last name of the company owner or the CEO or whatever it might be. They're ready to chat. They're all about getting results. That's what they were hired to do. So when they come in, they can take the wick out of the dynamite stick. They can take all the personalities out of the room, and we can really talk about where the business is going. But they also span multiple industries, multiple countries, and they see things that can be brought in from a best practice standpoint into your business to really help challenge the direction you're going and help you build a better future. So that's why I think these two are unbelievable. Data, we could talk about that for a long time, and I've got some slides I'd like to talk about on the data side of it. So BI can provide that real answer, if you will, from the tracking and measuring standpoint, much more focused on the zoom in, but it can also track longer term things. But whatever you might be tracking from a turnover, shrinkage, waste, profit, rationalization, SKU rationalization, it can help you figure out where you're going. So from a data 101 standpoint, I won't spend much time here, but I know that everybody understands this. There's good, better, and best with the data. I think everybody captures it, but what do you do with it? You got to optimize it. You got to use it to your advantage. You got to apply it in the right way to improve the results. Most people just, it's historical. They look at it and they're like, okay, we got to do better, but they don't really leverage how to do it across departments. So you got to leverage it to really make some key decisions. You got to be proactive with the way you're doing it, and then benchmarking. You can certainly get industry benchmarks, but you should also benchmark against yourself. Like, what are you trying to improve and how you're doing it? So again, this is, I call it data 101. And this would be, I hate to call it data 201, but it kind of is. This is basically the evolution of the data maturity model. And really, I'm not going to explain all of this, but I'm going to hone in on just 4 key things, right? It's looking at that hindsight, which is much more descriptive in the data. It's basically answering the what happened. And that's pretty much what all of the industry tends to be, whether it's your industry or others. People have been here. Now they're moving over to insight, which is sort of the next step. This is more of the diagnostic approach. Why did it happen? And maybe you're there. If you are, good, you're moving in the right direction. But we want to get you over towards foresight, which is much more prescriptive. Now, this is bringing in some predictive analytics. This is really getting more into the data and building some technology behind it, which makes a whole lot of sense if you're going to be a business for the future and be able to compete. Again, technology is awesome, and I'm going to tell you why here in a minute, and why it's good for your business. But amplified intelligence is probably the ultimate goal of what we've set out today. That gives you all sorts of automation type things. Now, automation is everywhere, and you've heard on it. Like, the telephone's been automated for, 40 years, right? You pick the phone, you call a friend, you get an answering machine at a business, and it says, press 1 for the order department, 2 for sales, 3 for customer service. That's automation. And I'm not suggesting automation that way. There's ways to use automation in an offensive manner, really to play offense in your business. And that's kind of what I'm talking about when I talk about automation. And then there's, of course, visualizing the data. Visualizing the data saves all sorts of time. I'm sure you all have analysts to some degree helping you mine the data, and even analysts would love to have some software, some tools to visualize the data. The best data visualization tools out there from affordable standpoint are probably like Tableau or Power BI, and I'm sure some of you have those. People have graduated from using Excel. So visual analytics, what do I mean by this? Well, it's just a way to visualize the data so you can remember it, so it's easy to find. And I'd give you an example, like find the 9s on the slide. Well, if you had to count them up, it'd take you forever. But if I just showed you where they were, data visualization focuses on it just focuses on the exceptions. It's what's working, what's not working. It's like a Pareto chart. It helps you break down what's contributing to the gains of my business the most. It may not be my most volume SKUs, but it's the ones that are really taking off. And does it make sense to add some more variance to that? Throw more logs in the fire where the fire's burning bright. And then the other places where you got big holes in your boat, how quickly can I get those off the shelf or move them somewhere else, right? So it's really about, or do I need to put them in a different department or market them a different way? So it's really about focusing on those things that are hurting your business or really helping your business. Okay. So you've seen this from, in the 1990s, it was all about code-based platforms, and then it moved into, visualizing data, which has been great. So it took a lot less time to get it. And now today, getting to this augmented analytics where it's involving all sorts of real-time insights so people can make decisions on the fly. Good stuff. So the future's coming faster than you think, so technology is very important to put in your business. Shifting out of data, because I think that's a key component of making the Zoom method work. You got to have that helping you. So zoom out, zoom in, benefits. It aligns the short-term actions into results that support that long-term vision. So no longer do you chug quarter after quarter, year after year, trying to get there. This constantly challenges to say, am I focused on the right thing? I would say even variable compensation is a key piece to make sure that people are supported the right way to go focus on the right things for you too, but that's a whole nother webinar. So forces acceptance of change, right? And fast change into the company culture. If you can get your company to understand that we're going to be fluid with regards to what we're doing, it makes people not complacent. It's not an option anymore in the company. You have to be challenging. You have to be, it has to be driving results. Realization that the zoom out will always be challenged, so no longer can you have a personality tied to it. It forces debate around some of the most basic business assumptions. So when you start thinking about the customer needs and regulations, supply chains, pandemics, competition, it's like demographics, population, it's like what are some of the key things that you really need to look at to be able to make the adjustments to your business? And this creates a keen eye for trends that could explode into something significantly bigger. So you really don't want to overlook some things that are going on. Greater focus on fewer initiatives also keeps your people very aligned to what you're doing. Instead of being everything to everybody from an employee standpoint, just focus on those few things that you think are going to take you to the future. And then understanding your why. I think you've all heard Simon Sinek say the why. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't, but most people know, or many people know, what they do and how they do it. They just don't know the why. And the best example I can give you, which is I think it's kind of cool, is Patagonia. I think you guys all know Patagonia. Maybe you have one of their coats, maybe you don't. I live in Minneapolis, so I get all sorts of things that keep me warm. But Patagonia, he went to his HR team and he flat out said, I don't want you to hire the most talented people any longer. Stop. We got to hire the people that are the most passionate about what we believe in, which is saving the planet. I want you to only hire people that are the most passionate about that. I don't care what their qualifications are. If they can do that, I'll teach them everything else. So that's definitely knowing your why, right? So I would say that's to the 10th degree. I'm not suggesting you march over to HR and say the same thing, but what I am suggesting is really understanding what your why is and make sure that's casted all the way through to the frontline levels, because if everybody knows what that is, then there's no debate about what you're doing day by day and how that supports where you're going. So that links everything together. All right, let me kind of break this down in another way. So you call it expand and contrast. I like to also call it tracking and measuring. But on the zoom out approach, this is functioning at the same time the zoom in is. So this isn't, they don't work independently, right? They work collectively together. And again, it's this 10 to 20-year future state of where it's going. You can look at it as your vision. You can say, what's my why? You can articulate this any way you want, but it's really about what do you want to be in the future? What do you need to be based on where everything's going, right? I don't know when we're going to have flying cars. I don't know what's going to be like George Jetson, or are you going to teleport from one part of the world to the other like Star Trek? And I'm not suggesting it's going to be that rapid of a change, but my point is the better read you have on the future, the better your business is going to be. And the more you align your people to look over the fence and study that and understand it, the better off you'll be. So what does your business look like to have that competitive advantage long term? And then the zoom in is really about scaling down the number of core initiatives that you have. It's important that something be transformative. It's important something be core, but you can't be wasteful. You got to think about what are these few things that are going to propel your company into some sort of a future state. And you got to remove all the barriers. You got to provide that adequate support. You have to have the right culture to make this work. Could say variable pay, but that's not always a necessary thing. And then the other key piece is this ongoing tracking and measuring. This kind of ties it all together. You could say it's closer to the zoom in, but there's definitely things that you can track and measure on the zoom out. But the ongoing tracking and measuring to make sure these 2 or 3 core initiatives are working are very important. And because you can't get behind things that just aren't going to provide that ROI. Okay, pretty chart. Let's get back to this. All right, so zoom out. Benefits to this approach. It looks farther ahead. It expands wider, right? So much further out, much wider into other industries to really understand how those things are impacting other businesses and how they could impact yours, so you can get ready for this accelerating pace of change, this volatility in the marketplace, which seems to be ongoing. I mean, you could look back 20 years and start pointing out some of the things that were really big changes, but you look back today and they would have been easy decisions if you had the right data, if you had the right team looking further out. They shouldn't have taken them by surprise, but they did because they didn't have the right tactics to address it. The Zoom will give you those right tactics. Be aware of evolving digital technology. What I mean by that is the cool thing about technology is it's probably the one resource that comes down in price over time. What was once out of the reach in your budget likely might be in reach today. So when you're looking at these other companies and saying, Jack, I can't do that kind of automation. That's hundreds of millions or millions of dollars, or that's just too much for me. It's like you'd be surprised the cost of some of these things and where they are today versus where they were even 2 or 3 years ago. So this is why I suggest you constantly look under the hood and understand what's going on. So discover use cases that have merit for your industry. They don't have to be a perfect tie, but you can see how it worked and think about how that that technology worked as a solution for that company and how it might work for yours. I think these are important pieces to be able to challenge the status quo and get out of this 5-year box of this traditional plan. Ask for help from outside practitioners. Doesn't matter who you bring in, bring somebody to challenge your business, challenge you with regards to where you're going, and provide some insights that are beyond what you and your team have access to. Let them come in and challenge the way you think. This removes all those personal attachments to projects and initiatives. It also helps you explore white space that maybe you didn't see. And I would say explore partnerships. It doesn't have to be a giant CapEx expense. You could partner with some other company to do home delivery or curbside service or share a warehouse or supply chain, even e-commerce or websites. And some of this stuff might be like, I can't do that, they're my competitor. But there are some things out there that would make sense, and you don't have to be the ones to develop it. It could just be an add-on service that allows a better customer experience and you to address the future and the needs right now, so you don't have to do some big investment. So it must have alignment from the leadership, without a doubt. Without having full alignment from the leadership, none of this will work. So everybody's got to buy off that, there's going to be candor, there's going to be debate, and evolution of the customer needs is going to continue. So zoom in benefits. This is, you got to identify and agree on those few key things, which is important. And that does take time, and that takes a lot of conversation. So that's a key important piece, and those meetings should happen ongoingly. There's some guidelines here, right? So you got to think about what's the greatest impact. Like what do we get behind, and what do those key initiatives look like? I would say definitely needs to be core, and it definitely needs to be transformative, right? It doesn't all have to, like the core one doesn't have to be transformative, but you need to be thinking about, what do I need to focus on to get my business to explode? Like what's that one thing that's going to be something I need to go down the rabbit hole real deep to make sure I'm very, very good at it. So transformative initiatives and then core initiatives. And I'd say 2 or 3, that's about all you need to do. And they can change, but that's what you need to do. Eliminates that wasteful financial spreading of resources all over the place, because when you do that, a lot of these resources, you may have not put enough behind some that had merit and it failed. So this is why you reduce the focus, increasing the funding just to a select few. It ensures it gets it right. And again, you can focus your people through pay or other ways to make sure that they're buying off and through your culture and et cetera. So ongoing collaboration, to reset, you definitely got to be deliberate in the way you pick these. Tracking and measuring is unbelievably important. And again, ROI is good, and so you got to have results, but there's other things like customer loyalty, number of repeat businesses. These things can also signal that it's the right thing to focus on, because that's the name of the game, right? Is growing your business, growing the number of people in the store, and then finding a way to sell them more things when they're there. It's increasing that basket cart, right? So it's that, again, ongoing collaboration that is going to be the key, that routine measurement, that tracking and measuring, which seems to be the glue and the success to make sure you get that right. And it's quarterly meetings or trimesterly meetings, not only to discuss the outside industry, but also what's happening day to day. Okay, so some additional insight. Looking ahead is essential for long-term survival and setting a clear direction for the company. This is super critical, as I've been kind of keying on. Technology and demographics, these things, are probably the two areas to predict what's going to happen. I mean, we know population's likely going to grow, or you can kind of see where it's headed. You kind of know if you live in a good area or bad area, your store's there or not. And then technology, the cost of it comes down. So there's all sorts of things that you could bring in to help you tomorrow that maybe today are too expensive, but there might be some things that would help you really accelerate and scale up your business. And then, of course, a clear view of the future, which provides that keen insight to some of the short-term adjustments to make sure that, your ship's going to actually make it to port on the other side of the world, right? So you do got to do some nominal tweaks, but you can't have your hand on the wheel constantly turning, big moves. It's got to be smaller moves for that, and then adjustments and the other thing. I started thinking about throwing the ball at a moving target. You don't throw it to where it's standing now. You throw it to where it's going, and it's that 80-20 rule. 20% of your SKUs are probably delivering 80% of the profit, right? So those are no different, and it's much the same. So I think of zoom out as opportunities, and I think zoom in as priorities. And then lastly, I would say alignment of leadership is probably the most primary, or the first thing that is absolutely got to happen. Be aware that there's going to be a culture shift when you go to this kind of an approach. I say that because change makes everybody worried and scared. And so, making sure you're doing the right number of engagement surveys, making sure you're checking the pulse of your people, make sure your management is trained to their direct reports and how they converse and keep them up to speed. Communication is real important to be able to work in that kind of a culture. And some of this is definitely going to be a culture change for some of you. Outside practitioners, again, I think they can help you challenge the status quo. Potentially you can do it on your own. I'm just saying this is probably some added insight that might help you get there a little quicker. And then support with the process, the tools, and technology. If you don't get behind what you're saying, it's probably not going to work. And if you don't get everybody's buy-off, yeah, it's probably going to fail too. So, there's other things that will submarine you if you can't connect all the dots. And then return on investment is always important, so you constantly have to be checking to make sure that you're tracking all the right metrics and they're showing you what you need to know. Okay, and then some of the things to get started, I would say for sure, blow off the dust on your 5-year plan, make sure that makes sense. Discover your why, make sure everybody in your organization understands that, be aware of your cultural shifts, and then make decisions that support that why, not only long-term, but short-term too. And then call for help if you need some. We're always here. All right, that is a wrap with regards to the Zoom method, the difference between that and the traditional. I'm open to questions if you have any.
Thank you for that, Jack. I appreciate it. I think we all appreciated that information. So as Jack said, he's open to questions, and feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll just wait a couple seconds here to see if anyone has any questions.
I'm curious how many people are actually considering dusting off their 5-year plan and maybe thinking differently. Also curious how many people use a higher form of business intelligence. When I say a higher form, I mean it's really about visualizing the data. Who's made recent changes and what are you using?
All right, I'm not seeing any questions right now. Of course,
Okay.
people can always follow up.
Yep.
And,
well, hopefully I nailed the hit the nail on the head and delivered it well. But
it didn't lead to any questions. That's how good your presentation was.
Well, there's a lot to the business, and this is just a strategic piece of it. I know it. And sometimes operating day to day is much more topical because it's relevant as we're trying to get ready for 4th of July and other things. So totally get it. My cell phone's there. My work number's there. I'm in my office now, but I'm not here that often. Cell phone's a great way to track me down. Please write it down. That's my email address. Call me anytime. Love to talk about the business. I've got a good connection with grocery. I spent some years working for Kroger, 3 to 4 years going through high school and college. So I really helped my base foundation when I left that company, graduated, and went to go work for Anheuser-Busch. But however we can help your business, we'd love to. I think Jeff Rabel's also on the call, and he's local in Philly, so you can certainly call him too. And we have a number of other folks that are involved at Baker Tilly as well. I'm sure most of you know who they are. So appreciate the time.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and have a great day and stay safe.
Yep, you too.
Thanks.